Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here, and a big thanks to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to present here. Today, I'm going to present my joint work with Chunhua Wu and Bao Hongsun. And this work is about the unraveling the drivers behind the review polarization via LLMs. And we're trying to see whether is that because of shifting rating standards, or whether customers' experiences are in fact changing. All right. So polarization is becoming increasingly prevalent in almost every aspect of our life. So we see this in economic inequality and political views, and also even social media messages. And you can see that on the graph to the left, the wealth of the top 10% of the world is pulling away from the bottom 50%, right? So there is polarization in wealth inequality. And at the same time, studies have shown that exposure to social media messages is leading to increasing political polarization as well. So this broader trend is also showing up in the domain of consumer-generated content. So here, I have a distribution of star ratings on Yelp over time, and there is a clear pattern of polarity, right? But the thing is, it wasn't always this polarized, right? So here, you can see, I have the data from 2005 to 2022. And at the beginning, in the early years, you can see that the share of extreme ratings, 1 and 5, they account for about less than 40% of the total number of reviews. But gradually, all these ratings are becoming more and more polarized. And in the end, by 2022, the end of our sample period, they account for about 70% of the total ratings.
The average seems to be fairly constant, or not?
The average is declining.
It's declining.
Yeah. So actually, this is increasing faster than the positive ones. Yeah. So this
very interesting. So I'm wondering whether this reflects like the fact that people are becoming more polarized, or this overlaps with the growth of this platform altogether. So this might be just mediocre restaurants are showing up first, and really good ones and really bad ones are starting to arrive later.
Yeah, great point. So we'll have some patterns showing in our later slides. We examine all these patterns from these angles, like these different angles as well. And I guess ahead of the slides, we still see a polarization pattern, even if we control for business types or business quality. So it's not really because of business turnover. More questions? Okay, wow, okay, only on the second slide. Or essentially the first slide, right?
So I had the same thought, but
Okay.
more on the demand side. So, I mean,
Uh-huh.
there could be different types of consumers kind of entering the Yelp platform.
Exactly, right? There's a whole selection process,
Yeah.
right? In fact, literature has shown that the people who like a certain product would adopt this product first, try it first, and then write really positive reviews. And the less enthusiastic consumers will arrive to the market later and engage with the product later, and they write like mediocre reviews or negative reviews. So even for the same business, you can see that over time, their reviews become more and more negative. So this is well documented in the literature already. We also control for this type of selection. Okay.
Are there any people who were reviewing on Yelp in 2005, 2006 that we're still reviewing 17, 18 years later?
Yeah, we have a graph showing that too.
Oh, the same,
Yeah,
you can see them
Well,
also
okay,
become
not
the same
necessarily,
person
okay.
becomes more
Actually, not necessarily the same person, but we have later slides. We have a graph by reviewer cohort
Okay.
and reviewer tenure. So when they started writing a review versus how long they have been on the platform, we have that too.
So that cohort starts getting more, like the 2006 cohort gets more polarized over time.
We do see that as well. Yes.
Very cool.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So any more questions? Okay, so essentially, right, this polarizing pattern is changing the 5-star scale into a binary one, right? So so I guess based on all those questions, you guys are already really interested in what's happening, right? So this paper is about trying to figure out what is exactly happening. But we're trying to see this from the perspective of scale or content. So scale, by that, we mean, are people's rating standards changing? So for the same experience, are they more or less likely to give a moderate rating versus like extreme rating, right? So a good restaurant experience worthy of 4-star in the past may be inflated to 5-star today. And conversely, right, a bad experience that's worthy of a 2-star rating in the past may be deflated to 1-star rating, right? So we call that a scale effect, basically the change in people's rating standards. And on the other hand, it could also be that people's experiences are polarizing, right? They may be more or less satisfied in the past compared to today. And their experience and their level of satisfaction, they are reflected in review content or the review text. So that's what we use to capture their experiences. That's what we call the content effect. Okay, I'll give this opportunity to Olivia first.
Thank you. I'm wondering if you think of this content effect as really being like fundamentally about the like real level of satisfaction or about people reporting their satisfaction in different ways.
Aha, okay. So this is kind of the key thing that we're trying to key challenge we're also trying to figure out. And this is also one of the major feedbacks we want to get from you guys. So basically, maybe it's better for me to give you a picture of this. Okay. So what we see that so this is a distribution of some keywords, the common keywords in reviews. And we're plotting this across star ratings over time, right? What's really interesting is on the word good, right? You can see here I have a 2012 distribution for 2012. You can see that the word good is associated with the 4-star rating, mostly, right? Back in 2012, but gradually it's being associated more and more with 5-star ratings. So this, right, maybe, it's the consumers, how they write their feelings is becoming more and more different. It's maybe the word use, right? But when you think of this, so would you think today, right, when we describe the best time of our life, we use the word, yeah, it was good. Or do you think we'll say, oh, it was fantastic. I was ecstatic, right? It was terrific. So we're trying to kind of figure out, we don't have rigorous proof, but we kind of just based on intuition and judgment, we believe that is more because people's rating standards are changing, right? How they grade their experiences are changing. And this is kind of corresponding to concurrent with what we see in the education literature as well, right? A C in the past is now in fact an A. So what we believe the story is really about people's rating standards may be changing instead of the word use. If anything, the word use may be more polarized instead of being more moderate. So that's basically our argument. And if you have any suggestions on this to provide a more rigorous evidence, that would be fantastic. And please do provide the feedback. Okay, Kiara, and then Kat.
Our language also has become more hyperbolic, right? So
yeah,
everything is awesome or horrible.
Yeah.
While 10 years ago, we were talking about good and bad.
Yeah.
And so I would love to see the same graph that you showed us for stars.
Yeah.
For hyperbolic words.
In fact, there are more words on the side, but I kind of cut the picture just so you guys can zoom in on this. So yes, later actually I'll show you a slide with the distribution of content, and we do see a polarization of words as well.
Because you seem to be holding constant the experience through the words that are used.
Great. So Kiara, let me ask you this question. I can't really read your mind, so how can I tell how you feel?
Why you are asking for
Exactly. So it's really hard to know, right? So I can't read your mind. I can't read people's mind in general. So, okay, yes.
I had the same immediate reaction, and there are words that their frequency is changing. One of my personal rules when I browse YouTube is that if the title has the word hate or insane, I don't click on that because that person has a different sense of perspective, like proportion than I have.
Yeah.
And I think you could see over time, it's likely the frequency changes, certain adjectives may help to indicate how word meanings have changed over time.
Okay, so yes, so that's another issue, right? So okay, so we also have graph that's showing the word great, terrific versus terrible, and you also see a little bit of this. You do see this as well, which means people are using more extreme words. On the other hand, how do you evaluate how they feel? We find that it's like a really hard thing to do. We can only take your words for it. So how you feel is expressed in words. All right, so there's too many questions. Okay, okay. Sorry. Wrong, right.
So, have you done a valence analysis of the emotion in this text, or you have like, because a valence analysis would be you just take the text and you give it a number, like
Yeah.
-5 to 5.
Yeah.
So it will be consistent over time. You will see if the valence changes. You can also compare older and newer valence, same valence text and see if the ratings change, right? Like I'm not saying the valence measure is correct. It's just going to be the same valence measure for 2 different time periods.
Okay, so we use the LAWC to look at the same thing, right? And a couple of things. So LAWC, we can see a strong association with what do we see versus the LAWC words. And yes, there is a bit of a greater valence in terms of like how people express their emotions. And the second thing is, here in our paper we use LLM instead of look, and we use that just to capture more nuances in the language. And the prediction, in terms of prediction, the precision rate is a lot higher for LLM, which is, I guess, no surprise. So essentially, basically, we choose the LLM, but we also relate the LLM to the look in order to see what those embeddings mean, what kind of language feature or emotions or sentiments it's picking up. Okay, Ashton, and then Justin.
Yeah, so like, I know you can't read people's minds, but like, think about In-N-Out. In-N-Out
Yeah.
Burger was great in 2005, it's
Yeah.
still great now.
Yeah.
And it's exactly the same product.
Exactly.
And could you tell me to some degree whether like the distribution of what the words people use to describe In-N-Out Burger has changed over time? If that hasn't
Okay.
changed,
Okay.
then I'm willing to sort of accept the mapping of language to experience is similar.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Actually, that's a great idea. Yeah. So okay. So at the beginning, we were also thinking about maybe actions. They're a lot louder than words, right? So maybe we look at the customers' choices, right? The word demand estimation and whatnot, right? But the issue is that they are influenced by the outside option, right? So we also don't know how the outside options are changing. But burgers is relatively generic.
In-N-Out Burger is like literally 100%.
Yeah.
As somebody's probably eaten an In-N-Out Burger like every week or two since 2005.
It's true. That's a great idea, right? Okay. That's
It's not the best category there because it's part service component.
Okay.
It's always been a
But
long
the
time.
idea of like taking a single
Yeah.
category, it's great.
So
Justin and then Sridhar and then Aaron, and then maybe I should move on, but we can also stay here.
you don't have to take questions. You
Yeah.
can present your research.
Okay,
So building off of that, and as well as Ken's points a little bit, right? When I think of a burger, yes, the burger probably doesn't change, but the way that people evaluate burgers might have changed, right? Where previously we think a burger is hearty, now we might say a burger is greasy or unhealthy, right? But I think this question of kind of the extent to which words mean different things in different time periods is actually important to capture. I'll give another example, right? Ken used the example of insane. There in the late, I'd say like 2010s, late, 2020 or like late 2010s, there was the word mid that became very popular, right? And mid sounds like and semantically is in the middle, but if you follow modern parlance, and I might be kind of reporting on myself a little bit here, mid is actually pretty bad now. People refer to that to mean actually much below par. So how would you look to address this, right? In the absence of being able to read someone's minds? Maybe one way that you could look at it is look at the ways in which this word is embedded within other text, right? So in a word style kind of embedding, then mid is the same as other words that would appear at similar times in similar circumstances. And we don't think that the text around it is changing as much, but certain terms individually might change. So maybe you could identify it this way.
Okay, that's a great idea.
I want to say that maybe social media has influenced how these words mean now.
Yeah.
Because in social media, they can see they're amazing, but everything really sucks.
Horrible, yes.
So maybe people have gotten used to that. This is increasing use of social media. And results, some of these goods are now, you have to be 5-star to even get noticed.
Right,
So
two.
1-star here.
Okay, so this, yes. So this also comes back to this, like the mapping between words and the numerical ratings where people choose feelings, right? So in this paper, for now, our ground truth is about the text. We believe that the text is really expressing how people feel. And also if people are more and more using extreme words, even to describe mediocre experience, then we shouldn't see something like this, right? So we shouldn't see that they're using good to describe the really good experience. So in this paper, what we're holding constant is just basically the mapping between the people's experience and also the words being used. But all the good points that have been raised, we will absolutely incorporate into our study as well. All right. Okay. So the scale effect versus content effect, they could have different implications, right? So for the scale effect, because they're not attached to the underlying experiences of the customers, and they're likely to introduce noise to the entire rating system and reduce the signaling value. And this is bad news for businesses, consumers, or platforms. But if it's mostly coming from the content effect, then reviews are still carrying genuine information for businesses and also for consumers. So this could be informative for businesses to target their core customer base and therefore provide improved product offerings. So because of the different implications, we think it's important to decompose the scale effect versus content effect that's driving the review polarization. So in this paper, we provide a framework to decompose these two effects, and we also examine the contributing factors, which have been mentioned before as well. For example, could be aggregate time trend, could be reviewer and business turnover and their heterogeneity. It could also be all of the self-selection process we also discussed. So in this paper, we're also trying to see to what extent the scale effect could be attributed to all of these different factors as well. And then when we explore the impact of the scale effect on the informativeness of ratings as well. And for that, we look at the impact on the usefulness votes. So some reviews receive votes of being useful or not. We want to see whether reviews that contain a large scale effect would have fewer usefulness votes. And then we look at the impact on the distribution of average ratings of businesses. So the scale effect by itself could potentially distort the rating distribution. And this is particularly important for consumers when they compare businesses, right? So after all, average ratings is what consumers use to try before they make a purchase decision. All right, So our paper is related to several strands of the literature. In the interest of time, I'll just go through this very quickly. The first strand is about the impact of reviews on sales. And our paper kind of contributes to this in that we also show that the scale effect could potentially affect consumers' choices. And our paper is also related to lots of papers, especially those written by the people who are in this room, regarding polarity, extreme positivity, fake reviews, and also impact on the informativeness of ratings. And our paper is also very closely related to this literature about dynamics of reviews. For example, there's the observation that ratings tend to be lower over time for the same business, and due to the selection process that I just discussed earlier. And in the context of the literature, our contribution is that we provide this framework to decompose review polarization to these two different effects, and we can say something about what factors contribute to this trend. All right, so the data set we have is the Yelp open data set. And it contains about 7 million reviews from 11 metropolitan regions, including all these places. Edmonton, for those people who are not from Canada, it's a Canadian metropolitan area. And the data spans from 2005 to January 2022, and it contains detailed review message information related to ratings, content, user usefulness votes, and user names, and also business names and addresses. All right, now let me show you some descriptive patterns. And these descriptive patterns will also answer some of the questions earlier. Okay, so the polarization could be driven by many different things, right? Particularly user and business turnovers. So this one is a distribution of the star ratings by business category. And you can see that these are the top categories on Yelp. But restaurants is still the biggest one, which accounts for about 70% of the total reviews. But you can see that across all of these different categories, right, we see a polarization pattern. So this is no exception to a specific category. And Aaron?
A quick clarifying question. Is this like the total number of reviews, or this is just the new reviews for that year? So we're looking at the stock.
The total,
So the 2020, is
Yeah.
that including the reviews from 2008 also?
No, no.
Reviews?
no, just that year's review, the new reviews, yes. Okay. All right, so this graph shows you the distribution of star ratings by review cohort. So the horizontal line indicates the year of the Yelping since, so basically when they entered the platform. And what we're plotting here is just basically for each cohort, we take all their reviews and we plot this distribution. You can see that over time, it looks like a newer cohort, they're more polarized than the older cohort. So the reviewer turnover could be contributing to this trend. And now let's look at the tenure. So for each cohort, within each cohort, do we see a polarization trend, right? We also see that, right? So here, what we have is for the cohort of 2005, you can see that some of those people continue to write reviews, right? That answers Ashland's question, I think. And you can see that they are also becoming, like, even within the same cohort, they're becoming more and more polarized. And the literature also talk about the reviewer activities could affect how they write reviews as well. So we divide our reviewer type into how many times they write a review, multiple times or just one time. And you can see that here's the distribution of the star ratings by the reviewer types. You can see that the one-time reviewers, they're more polarized than the multi-time reviewers. And but for each of them, there's still a polarization pattern going on. So this suggests that there's some kind of aggregate time trends at play as well. Right. So these graphs basically provide provide some early insight as to what kind of factors is driving this pattern of review polarization.
So I don't know a ton about the polarization literature, but different parts of the country may have different levels of polarization. Does this kind of, can you cut this up cross-sectionally and show us in places where polarization has increased, do you see a larger effect or?
Okay, so that could be in fact related to probably political polarization. And in our analysis, we did kind of look at those as well. But we don't see the more political polarized area will also have a more polarized review patterns. But for this, we have in fact had a graph of this distribution by all of the 11 metro areas as well. And the pattern is in fact fairly consistent.
So you're gonna get to the platform changes because it became more kind of pay for play, and that so like the worst restaurants might be more salient. People might be getting matched with worse things more kind of ex ante, and then leaving bad reviews as a result because Yelp kind of sucks now compared to what it used to be. And so I
Okay.
wonder if that's what's going on.
Okay, so we do not necessarily study that behavior specifically, but we use later you'll see we use the review sequence to capture that type of dynamics. Okay, all right. So conceptual framework, and our conceptual framework is we have this. So for each review we have a numerical rating and we have the review text, and this red arrow between them, basically the mapping between the content and the numerical rating, is what we call the scale, right? So basically people's rating standards. And what we're examining is that whether that's changing, this mapping is changing or not. Several factors would affect both the review text and also the scale as well, right? The user characteristics and business characteristics that we talked about before. And there is also the review timing, right? The years in which it was, when it was written. And the literature also talk about the weekend reviewers could be more or less polarized or negative or positive, right, when they write reviews, because those people are different from the people who write reviews during the weekdays. And there's also a review sequence that in fact captures some of the selection process that you just described before. So in this paper, because business type could affect the language being used by the reviewers. So in this paper, we focus on the restaurant industry, the restaurant reviews, to make sure that generally speaking, how they write, the language they use to write reviews is relatively consistent. All right, so here is our model. So of all the prediction models out there, we choose the ordered logit model because it's easy to interpret, right? We can basically talk about which part is the scale effect and which part is the content effect. So this model basically maps the review content, which for which we use the LLM embeddings to capture the language nuance. And this model maps the content onto the review ratings. The specific formula is just basically the probability of any review having this rating K is equal to the difference between these two density function, cumulative density functions. And the parameters in this model represents the scale. So the coefficients in front of the C, which is the content, those are the content coefficients. They tell us which factor is more important in this mapping, right? On what experience does the people value the most. The alpha parameters, they are the thresholds, basically cutoff thresholds for these different 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 star ratings. And basically because we have 5 levels, so we have 4 scales, basically. And there's also the scaling factor, sigma. And the sigma basically captures the noisiness of the logit character. And here, the beta, we kind of we assume that the beta basically stays relatively constant over time. And this assumption is supported by our preliminary analysis, where we estimated this model for each metropolitan and for each year. And we take out those beta and then plot them over time. We see that they stay relatively constant. So basically in the main model, where we pull data from all years, we set beta to be relatively constant. But for alpha and sigma, we specify those as a linear function of a number of factors. So here, in terms of the scale effect, when we talk about scale effect, it really corresponds to changes in these alpha and sigma. Okay, so the alpha and sigma, they're linear functions of the year indicator and user cohorts or tenure and user gender, which we infer from the user's names, and also one-time reviewer, weekend, etc. And the estimates of sigma are very close to 1. So in this presentation, I'm not going to talk about the sigma and only focus on alpha. Just to quickly go through the encoding process. So we basically feed all this review text into OpenAI API, and we obtain the LLM embeddings for all of these reviews. And the dimension of the embeddings is over 1,500. So this is a little too big for our order budget. It requires a huge amount of memory, and it was very, very slow. So in the end, to overcome this challenge, we basically used a PCA analysis to extract the top principal components that capture about 80% of the total variation in the original embeddings. And that sped up things a lot more. Okay, let me show you an overview of the results. So we used a sample of 2012 and 2021. This is because before 2012, not many reviews were available. And we estimated each market separately to capture the heterogeneity across the different metropolitan areas. And the overall accuracy rate is about 70%. It's highly accurate for 1 and 5-star ratings. So here I have a confusion matrix for Philadelphia area. You can see that the hit rate is fairly high for the 1 and 5-star ratings, but less so for the moderate ratings. But most of the prediction errors lie within 1-star difference from the actual rating. So we feel fairly good about this. Now let's take a look at how the threshold change, right? Threshold is just basically how the scale changes. And because alpha, in fact, because of all of those factors we put in there, alpha changes with each review, right? So to represent alpha, we basically take an average across all of these reviews in each years and just plot that out. You can see that there's a clear pattern of polarization, right, on the scale, on this mapping.
It's going that direction.
Yeah, it's just vertical direction. Yes, yes. So the good thing about the beta, this model, is that we can also transform this multi-dimensional text into a unidimensional score. So here I'm plotting the distribution of the content score. It's basically C times beta. And you can see that in the earlier years, the distribution has a one mode, but over time, the content is also diverging. Right? This diverging is becoming also more and more polarized. Right? Because we just recall, we specify alpha as the number of a linear function of number of factors. Now we can in fact examine what is the contribution of each factor to the overall change in alpha. And the first one we can examine is the year fixed effects. Right? So here, what I'm plotting is the estimates of the year fixed effects for the Philadelphia region. And the color lines represent the year fixed effects. And the dotted lines here represents what you saw, the average alphas in the previous slide. So the difference between them basically is the contribution coming from user and the business heterogeneity or the selection process. Right? So for 5 stars, you can see there's quite a big difference. And for other factors, for the cohorts, we see that the newer cohorts show increasing positivity. So basically, for the cohort fixed effects, they are relatively constant on the 1 and 2 star thresholds, but decrease dramatically on the 3 and 4, and 4 and 5 thresholds. And there's for the within cohort trend, we also see that all cohorts are declining over time. So this means that more experienced reviewers are becoming somehow more positive. And one-time reviewers are much more polarized than multi-time reviewers, about 16%. And male reviewers more polarized than female reviewers, about 3.5%. And weekend reviewers are moderately more polarized. Dante?
So how do you think the arrival of mobile devices is impacting this? So I think you can control and you actually can plot this for mobile versus only computer.
Yeah, especially
And the distance between the experience and when you actually review might matter, right?
Yeah.
So when you have only mobile, only PC, you actually go home and then review, so you have time to process it.
Yeah.
With mobile, you actually do it when you're actually eating, right? Sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's something we could control on, especially regarding the length of reviews, right? So if you're on the phone, you might write shorter reviews as well. In the back.
Are you able to see the number of reviews the restaurant has at a given time? I'm wondering if there's a lot more reviews, you're more motivated as restaurants are collecting more and more reviews, you're more motivated to just give extreme.
Yes. So that's captured by the review sequence. The order of the review in a business review history. So that's been shown by Godes and Silva 2012 to capture the effect of impact versus effort trade-off. So when you see lots of more ratings in the past, you want to differentiate, and writing reviews take effort, right? So you want to be very extreme in your ratings.
So review sequence just like which review it is.
Sorry?
Is review sequence just which review it is in the sequence?
Yes.
So,
Yeah. Right.
Do you think fake reviews might be affecting it over time?
It could be affecting this over time. Currently, we're abstracting from it because we don't know how to identify it.
Maybe
But-
the one time, so if you remove all of the one time, do you see the same pattern for the multiple time reviewers, or it's just muted pattern, or
Is it more muted pattern?
but you still see the polarization?
You still see that. So which
Oh, so you have
is a
filters.
good segue
You
to
have filters like a 40. If they can. Well, I mean. There are 40 in there, so.
I think I should get going. 4 more minutes left. Okay, all right. So I think Ron provided a good segue to this slide. So we basically decompose the contribution of all of these factors to the variation in the alpha thresholds. You can see that here accounts for 47%, almost half, right? And the one-time reviewers, 21%. And cohort related is about 10%, and the rest that comes from all the other factors. And now come to this moment of decomposing the polarization trend, right? So this is really about decomposing the change in review distribution. And so for any change in the extreme ratings, the percentage of extreme ratings from the base year 2012 for any year T could be broken down into the content effect and the scale effect. The content effect is basically the change in predicted percentage of extreme ratings due to content only. So we need to fix this threshold alpha. So how do we do this? We just basically use the 2012's average alpha as the baseline. And the specific formula is just basically using the predicted shares based on year T's content minus the predicted shares based on 2012's content. And all of these are based on the base year scale, right? And the rest is basically the scale effects. And the scale effect could be further broken down into the one that comes from the year trend, right? The year fixed effects, and the one coming from the user and business heterogeneity. And here the formula is just basically again for it's basically the difference between our estimated model and the counterfactual where we set all the year fixed effects to 0. So basically that's a baseline fixed effect, year fixed effects. So the results for Philadelphia is shown on this table. You can see that for 1-star reviews, the contents account for a lot more. It's about 80%. And the year effect the scale effect related to the year accounts for almost all of the other 20%. And the scale effect related to user heterogeneity is roughly 0, very close to 0. And this is in fact consistent with a graph that I just showed you before. And for the 5-star rating reviews, however, this pattern changes. So for the content effect, it accounts for about 35% of the total change. But the scale effect from here accounts for roughly 50%. And the scale effect from heterogeneity, user and business heterogeneity, accounts for about 16%. So this pattern actually is pretty consistent across most of the natural regions, except for only one, the Edmonton, probably because it's Canadian. But generally speaking, so for the increase in 1-star reviews, the content effect dominates. But for 5-star ratings, the scale effect dominates. Seems that people are just more inclined to give more positive reviews, extreme positive reviews or ratings. Okay, so the 1 minute left. So I just quickly go through this, the impact on informativeness. So the first one, we just read up the question of the usefulness vote on the scale effect, which is basically the difference between the actual rating versus the predicted rating based on content. And we also control for the contents of the review. And we also control for all observable characteristics of the reviews, including year, months, fixed effects, and business fixed effects. So our results basically show that reviews with higher scale effect are much less likely to be voted as useful. And also negative content is more likely to be voted as useful. And this is probably because consumers want to avoid some pitfalls in business services. And lastly, I want to show you this, how the scale effect can distort distribution of ratings. So here I have an age distribution of the top 20% highest rated businesses in 2021. And the red region is the actual rating. And predicted, the blue one is based on the predicted ratings. And you can see that for the predicted rating, there are a lot more older businesses showing up. Right? The younger businesses are much less compared to the actual rating. And this is because people are becoming more and more, I guess, generous in giving 5-star ratings over time, right? So when we compare older businesses with younger businesses, it's not really fair for the older businesses. And if platforms can do adjustments and eliminate the scale effect, it could level the playing field for all businesses. So that's just basically everything I want to talk about. Because I'm running out of time, I'm not going to go through the conclusion. All right, so now I'm going to turn over to
Thank you so much for inviting me to present this very interesting paper. Today has already did a fantastic job presenting the main takeaways of the paper. So I'll be quick of summarizing what we learned from the paper, provided a little more of a background of why I think this type of research is very important and insightful, and along with some additional comments that I'm trying to help with the paper to think further. So the key observation that motivates the whole study is you see this very strong and very persistent trend in the review of the share of 1-stars and 5-star reviews over time. And same pattern as Limin had showed down due diligence, that you will find the same strong and persistent patterns across all the markets, across all kind of business types, across average ratings of all the business, across the time of the reviewers joining the platform, as well as how long they stay with the platform and how frequent they contribute to the reviews. You'll also see the same sets of trend for informative reviews versus non-informative reviews. So it's so strong and so prevalent that it does catch our attention as researchers. And the authors try to explain why we see an increased polarization in the online reviews. They try to propose two competing effects playing a role here. Does it really reflect real experiential changes, or it simply reflects the shifting scale? Now, in order to comment on this, they need a way to capture the varying experience while analyzing the scale shift, and then how did they do that? As many of you pointed out, we need to make an inherent assumption that text is sufficient to capture the experience. Therefore, they leverage the recent advances in the language models to predict the ratings with text embeddings. And anything that is not explained by these text embeddings would be attributed to the shifting scale. So more specifically, they cast this ordered logit model and put it to data. And then you will see part of the explanatory variables come from the textual embeddings they obtain from language models. And anything remaining will be attributed to the shifting scales. And they are even further trying to decompose the shifting scales by time dummies, year dummies, as well as some basic consumer and business heterogeneity. And a key result, if you want to remember, if you want to take away from this paper, is they can now quantify to what degree the shifting scales versus the changing content contributing to the increase in 1 stars and 5 stars. And let me try to summarize with just one single sentence. Happy families are all alike. The increase in 5 stars are mostly explained by an increased shifting scales. And every unhappy family is unhappy in their own way. The very bad experiences seems to mainly drive for the variations in the increase in one's reviews. And because they specify that scale shift in time dummies as well as heterogeneity, they could also comment on the scale effect actually pretty much reflect a time trend rather than heterogeneities. And then Limin nicely and towards the end of her talk show that somehow readers have some sense of this, in the sense that they consider reviews that comes with a higher degree of scale effect as less helpful, and reviews that are more negative as more helpful. I find this type of research very important and broadly relevant. The increased rating polarization really matters above and beyond the particular situation of online reviews, right? It applies to the peer review systems broadly, and we as educators, we would be really familiar to the situation where 3.5 20 years ago was as good as 4.0 today. And it couldn't be fully rationalized by the heterogeneity of something like B- is H&M. And you will from time to time get these teaching evaluations, which you probably also realize is getting more and more polarized. And sometimes it happens to conference reviews when we have to just vote with our numbers. So I'm going to say this alludes to a much deeper problem of how we are going to condense that very useful quality experiential nuances into an easy to process, yet potentially biased and numeric scale. And this paper finds a very appropriate context to quantify the scale effect versus content. It is also part of a rising literature which tries to decompose the group differences in outcomes with foundational models into traditionally unobservable factors versus observable factors. One such example comes from the work by Wafa, Effie, and Lai, who tried to actually fine-tune their own language models based on their resumes to capture the career histories and use that to explain the wage gap between genders. So I find this paper is doing something in a similar vein. They try to explain the rating changes by the changing experiences captured by language models. And one takeaway that we didn't get a chance to talk about, but you can get it from the paper, they find the simpler micro-founded model, which is ordered logit with principal component, actually match the performance of something that's completely black box in this case, with DNN in rating classification. So I find that to be quite interesting. Overall, very important and broadly relevant research. I would try for the rest of the time, try to center my comments around how should we think about policy implications given the data pattern? What are the additional considerations we might have when we use text as data for inferences and some future work? My first comment is more a reminder that the data pattern used to estimate this model is largely associational. And admittedly, the authors are being very straightforward and transparent with that. They say, we are training a prediction model here. However, I'm thinking when I try to interpret some of the results of potential policy implications, hints at a causal implication. So how should we think about the scale impact, informativeness of readings, and therefore the implications of what platforms can do? Take it one step back. That is in no way denying the value of descriptive type of work, right? So if we're looking at this type of work as more descriptive, describing some very insightful and important patterns, then probably the goal is to quantify the content effect versus scale effect more faithfully, more accurately, in which case you might care more about the predictive accuracy coming from your content embeddings. And if you compare the results here from the paper, it's clear that the way you set up your model will influence the decomposition result. So then it's worthwhile for the authors to think about what would be the main argument we take in our choice of models. Should we base off your choice of models mainly around improving prediction accuracy, or should you base off your choice on structural interpretation of the estimates? It's also, I would be curious about how much variation remained unexplained by the setup of this model. As I mentioned early on, documenting these very interesting and insightful descriptive patterns is quite important, because they would suggest for the next step, what could be the useful, interesting hypothesis to put to A/B test. For example, someone mentioned yesterday also that Gen AIs now are so prevalent, and we can leverage Gen AI to generate summaries of the text. So what if you use AI summary to summarize the content and get rid of the scale effect? Would that be considered as more informative than having both? So that would be something that platforms could definitely test with their A/B tests. Something Limin didn't get a chance to talk about today, but it's part of the paper. It's what authors are actively working on, is to show how review polarization really matters, how it really impacts the business revenue and potentially the perceived informativeness for consumers. I would say you have to overcome a lot of causal hurdles in order to make the claim, but that's something for the next step we will need to think about. And as some of you mentioned, there could be other hidden factors that could also explain for the pattern. And since yesterday we had such a heated conversation about fake reviews, this could be one thing that might be driving the polarization. It couldn't be fully accounted by text alone, according to Sherry Brett and the UBC paper. So part of those incoming, more extreme reviews might show its effects in the estimate of time dummy in the scale effect. My next comment would be about when we think about using text as data in inference, should we worry about the potential measurement errors introduced in the way we encode the text? For example, if the measurement errors vary across time, that obviously bias the decomposition between the averaging scale effect versus content effect. So at a high level, it's worthwhile for us to do some error analysis and think about how the measurement errors really potentially could vary, or if textual content does actually changes the way we think they are. This is easier said than done. So the easier way to do it is just to run some sensitivity analysis and see how that effect estimate may change by the way you represent text with different models. And more formally, some recent literature suggests that when you extract information or extract features as the first step, it's worthwhile to optimize the feature extraction and later on information economic inference together in one same objective function. And then it brings us back to this kind of tedious discussion of how much should we care about the prediction accuracy, and if the goal here is descriptive, and if the goal here is indeed accurately capturing to what degree content is playing a role here, probably we should care about the predictive accuracy. And if you notice, one important practice in the whole workflows is to reduce the dimensionality with principal components. That may not be a good idea because things that OpenAI observed with the very rich and information embeddings when you try to reduce the dimensionality with SVD or PCA, even by 10%, that has a huge impact on the downstream prediction accuracy. And that should be a very easy fix. If you the only reason why you want to apply PCA here is because of dimensions. The easy fix is thanks to the fast improvement of their embedding model, right? The model they used last year, text embedding 3 large, coming out last year, now can do can be shortened to as short as 256 dimensions and still preserve the concept representing properties according to OpenAI. So that's something that it's very easy for you to just try. But I see there's another layer of consideration here for your choice of PCA, right? You want some degree of interpretability. So to this point, my suggestion is why don't we just benchmark your performance against the very standard approaches, and to many of your suggestions from the questions just now, think about something as basic as TF-IDF, back of words. It's computationally a lot cheaper. It's much more interpretable than the ADA embedding plus truncated PCA. And given the previous slides, it's unclear to me whether this basic approach would perform anyway worse than the way you're doing right now. So the predicted performance across all these off-the-shelf models is quite data dependent, and I think it's worthwhile to give it a try and see how much the gain from interpretability as opposed to losing on the accuracy side of it. And choosing the right benchmark is also kind of important. Luke would not be a fair benchmark to showcase your performance events. My last comment was pretty much what can lead to next. By showing all these very important, very interesting patterns naturally triggers questions of why. What drives the polarization over time? What drives the shifting thresholds over time? Can we comment on the behavioral mechanisms behind it? The paper does document interesting associational patterns in terms of heterogeneities, and some of those things we think can we link it back to some behavioral theories, like how we have higher expectations when we are handing out for weekend rendezvous rather than weekday business lunch, and that higher expectation may lead to more dissatisfactions. Hedonic versus utilitarian viewpoints could also explain that too. The implications of knowing the behavioral mechanisms could really shed light on whether it's possible for us to even nudge consumers to be more thoughtful. I would skip this. I mentioned this. Fake reviews would definitely be one of the possible mechanisms explaining the same pattern. Another thing is when we think about the supply of reviews, in some sense, we can think that people might have more tendency to use extreme language and give extreme ratings in anticipation of readers are more likely to look at them. Right? There are existing media studies showing that negativity really boosts news consumption. So this might be another possible mechanism for the next paper. How do consumers make inferences around the distributions of polarization? Are they even aware of this increased polarization? Can they interpret the increased polarization as some signals of more niche product and market, which triggers a good match, but at the same time could be bad match for many people? So to summarize, very important and interesting studies for great potential to generate more impact at a bigger scale. Some of the policy implications can benefit from a little more causal investigation. And this paper just opens up a huge window for a lot more follow-up researchers to keep on understanding. Thank you so much.
All these points are really well taken, and thank the audience. I really want to thank the audience for providing all this really good feedback. And I think we just have a lot more work to do. And thank you very much.